Hello and welcome to another Sussex Podcast, the show where we discuss the British royal family with an emphasis on Prince Harry and Meghan, Duke and Duchess of Sussex. I am your host, G.K. Hammond. Today we review Prince Harry's book, Spare, which was released by Penguin Random House on January 10th, 2023. Why would the son of King Charles III write a memoir? Harry explains in the preface that his father and brother did not understand why he left the family business. And so Harry felt the need to explain. The preface is set in 2021 after the funeral of Harry's grandfather, Prince Philip. Harry says, quote, "I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was one thing to disagree about who was at fault or how things might have been different. But for him, meaning his brother, to claim total ignorance of the reasons I'd fled the land of my birth, the land for which I'd fought and been ready to die, my mother country." He says further down, "You don't know, Harold? I honestly don't." I turned to Pa. He was gazing at me with an expression that said, "Neither do I." Wow, I thought, maybe they really don't. He goes on to say, "How can I tell them? I can't. It would take too long. Besides, they are clearly not in the right frame of mind to listen. Not now, anyway. Not today. And so, Pa, Willie, world, here you go." End quote. So what follows in the rest of the book is Harry's life, stretching from 1997, the year that his mother Diana died, and weaving back and forth through time from birth to the present, but mostly moving forward from the day of the tragic car crash that took Harry's mother from his life, and with her the one person who seemed to guide him and demonstrate love in a way that Harry understood. Why the name or title Spare? Well, it's because that's what Harry was called, and still is called, for most of his life. He is at Balmoral with his brother when he's there at his grandmother's estate in Scotland. They share a room, and he says, quote, "My half of the room was far smaller, less luxurious. I never asked why. I didn't care. But I also did not need to ask. 2 years older than me, Willie was the heir, whereas I was the spare." This wasn't merely how the press referred to us, though it was definitely that. This was a shorthand often used by Pa and Mommy and Grandpa, and even Granny. The heir and the spare. There was no judgment about it, but also no ambiguity. I was the shadow, the support, the plan B. I was brought into the world in case something happened to Willie. I was summoned to provide backup, distraction, diversion, and if necessary, a spare part. Further down he says, "I took no offense. I felt nothing about it, any of it. Succession was like the weather or the positions of the planets or the turn of the seasons. Who had time to worry about things so unchangeable? Who could bother with being bothered by a fate etched in stone? Being a Windsor meant working out which truths were timeless, then banishing them from your mind." He goes on to say that you are forever a byproduct of who you weren't. I wasn't Granny, I wasn't Pa, I wasn't Willie, I was third in line behind them. And he says, "Standing resolutely behind the people you loved, wasn't that the definition of honor?" This is how that end quote, that's how he dealt with being called a spare. But it really did bother him deep down, as we'll see moving forward. The child was set adrift and back to school as if nothing had happened, and he's been effectively orphaned ever since, or at least that's how Harry seems to feel. Even when he was at Eton at the same time as his older brother, his brother told him to act as if they did not know each other. He wanted his own life without sharing it with a younger brother. There seems to have been very little guidance for Harry, but he took comfort wherever he could find it along the way. Nannies, security guards, substance abuse, rage-filled rugby. Harry calls his rage the red mist, and it can come upon him at any time. He redirected that red mist into the discipline of the army, and in doing so found direction, guidance, brotherhood, and a purpose. If one has paid attention to Harry over the years, the broad strokes of his life are familiar, and they are included in this book: his mother's death, getting trouble with the press, military service, meeting Meghan Markle. So it's the details that are intriguing. It's the same old stories, but from a different perspective, but also debunking a few, like he never went to rehab. That was a lie from the press. And adding a few, such as Harry suggesting that his father's mistress put many of those lies into the stories to make his father look great. You know, the single dad, long suffering and dealing with a rebellious teenager, in order to rehabilitate his father's image, but also rehabilitate the mistress's image as she's connected with the father. Harry's alleging some pretty terrible stuff about his stepmother. The book is comprised of 3 parts. Part 1, Out of the Night That Covers Me, which is mostly childhood and teen years. Part 2, Bloody but Unbowed, which is about early adulthood, military service. Part 3, Captain of My Soul, he meets Meghan and leaves the family business. Instead of those interstitial images on glossy photo paper that you often see in a memoir, biography, or autobiography, what Harry's done is given us 3 photos on each part, at the beginning of each part. So part 1, Out of the Night That Covers Me, is a photo of him and his mother as a small child, of course. And part 2, Bloody but Unbowed, is a photo of him in his uniform saluting. Part 3, Captain of My Soul, is a picture of him with Meghan. So he's bookended in the 2 chapters. Well, like the beginning of his life is with a woman that means a lot to him. The current part of his life is with a woman that means a lot to him. And in the middle, he's just by himself. And that, you know, it's just a picture of him alone, saluting. There are other people behind him, but it's cropped to be just him. So it gives you a feeling of into, through, and out of, you know, a sense of a journey there. Together with a woman he loves, by himself, and then again together with a woman he loves. So those 3 images are quite powerful. There's also another photo, since we're talking about them, on the back of the hardback dust jacket of Harry in his uniform as a little boy, like a play uniform, with his name, HRH, the Prince, on it. So it's a little play uniform of some kind. It looks to be about 10, I suppose, maybe a little smaller. So he selected these very carefully. We've talked about the cover of the book. It's an image of Harry close up, ear to ear. Each ear seems to be almost touching the edge of the photograph. He's just staring at you. It's very intense. And we mentioned how similar that was to Andre Agassi's book, Open. He also a close-up of the author, which was also ghostwritten by J.R. Moehringer. Both books were. Well, that's all for the images. There are many more personal images in the documentary Harry and Meghan on Netflix, if you're interested in that sort of thing. But he's very serious about the words here. That's wonderful. He's very serious. Moving forward, the ancient rules of storytelling are intention and obstacle. So each of these 3 parts will give us Harry's desire, and then that desire thwarted in some way. So in part 1, his childhood, he's looking for peace after his mother's death, some guidance, but he's basically talking about an emotionally stunted father who can't give him what he needs. He refers to his father's teddy bear that his father had taken to boarding school where he was bullied mercilessly. And the teddy bear was old and tattered by the time Harry was old enough to pay attention to it. And he said that tattered old teddy bear was indicative of the essence of his father, just sort of beat up. And so there was no guidance coming from his father in the way that he wanted to. In the same way that his father has said the same thing in his book about not having the parents that he needed. Furthermore, Harry also mentions, of course, his brother pushing him away when he needed him the most, and maybe not even knowing that his younger brother wanted to be around him that much, but he did. And just wanting to have some peace and to be left alone from the press, and the press did leave him alone until they didn't. And that's where the stepmother comes in and basically thwarts any sort of peace that Harry could have at school. And Harry's basically accusing her of destroying what peace he did have by colluding with the press about him as a teenager. And they've just been on him ever since. They've been ravenous to talk about Harry ever since as the naughty one. When Harry, if his stories are to be believed, and I do believe them, Harry was no more naughty than anybody else around him. They were all kind of naughty. It's just he was the prince. And he was not the firstborn who had to be seen as pristine and above board, even when he was engaging in the same types of stuff. So, substance abuse, fighting, all that sort of stuff. But apparently his older brother's reputation had to be preserved. Harry was available to be besmirched in the news. And so they did that to a child, apparently. And he's blaming different relatives for this, especially, though, his father's love interest. Moving on to part 2, intention and obstacle. Harry intends to have a girlfriend, but here we go, the press again, harassing girlfriends to the point where they go away. Harry wants to have a purpose in life after rattling around the school system. The army gives him a place to put the rage, the red mist, as he calls it, into a disciplined form that his country can make use of. And the press, again, ruin this. This is the obstacle. The press repeatedly disclosed his location, truncating deployment and ultimately ending his army career. Part 3, Captain of My Soul, again, intention and then obstacle. Harry intends to find purpose after the army. He finds it in meeting Meghan and having children, as well as various charities. But again, the obstacles are coming from the press and his relatives who want to destroy Harry's nucleus unit. Because if it means better press for his relatives, it means more money for the press. So if they can tell stories about Meghan to the public, they can distract the public from bad or negative stories about the other royals. If Meghan can be used to deflect bad attention, if she can be positioned as the most hated royal in the UK, then Harry's stepmother would not be called that any longer. She will no longer occupy most hated family member. Harry's uncle, who's under suspicion of some things, will also not be in the press if the whole cover is about Meghan. But the woman that the family wanted to keep quiet and suffer in silence is also the woman to which Harry gives the last word in his book. In the last chapter of Harry's book, Meghan gives birth to their second-born child, their daughter, in a new country in freedom, far away from the UK press. Giving birth this time was, quote, slightly easier this time because we were an ocean away from the old chaos and stress, end quote. Harry says he wants to be the first face that their daughter sees, so he helps deliver the baby. Later at home, Meghan jots down some thoughts in a journal about the birth. That was everything. That is a man. That is not a spare. So that was the end of the book. It ends with the title word as written by his wife, the woman his relatives wanted to keep silent. I think that's very poignant and lovely. Meghan really didn't know what she was getting into. She was dropped into a system where she would not be able to win. The problems here that we've seen in the news are truly not about Meghan. She just happens to be there. The epilogue, as I suspected, is about the death of Queen Elizabeth II, Harry's grandmother, which occurred just before this book was originally to be released in late 2022. They pushed the release date back to January. Harry bookends his story, fittingly, with the funeral of Prince Philip in the preface and the funeral of Queen Elizabeth in the epilogue. Their funerals serve as a proscenium arch beneath which Harry's story plays out on stage in front of us. In both instances, we get the same behavior. Disrespect for Harry and his wife in the UK, and then a desperation to go home and in comfort and happiness in the US. Highlights of Spare. For me, that would include a moment around the time when Queen Elizabeth was on death's door and Harry's father tells him that Harry's wife was not welcome to come and see the Queen and basically disrespects Meghan. So Harry has a Will Smith moment, that get my wife's name out your mouth moment with his dad, and I was blown away. I don't know why, because Harry said he was going to protect Meghan, and he means it, including in those private conversations. So he's letting everyone, including the world, on notice that he will not accept disrespect for his wife or anybody else that he loves, which is good. Although I don't think you speak to a king like that and still expect to be invited to his coronation. Also, the whole stepmother stuff in the book probably won't go over well with the queen, the now current queen, so who's going to be coronated alongside her husband in a few months. So I'm thinking Harry might not even be interested in going, even if he were invited as he would normally be invited. He is still a counselor of state, which is a person who serves as proxy whenever a monarch needs them to, but I doubt seriously that the king will ever call on Harry to do much on his behalf in his absence. Certainly after all of this, no, probably not. But that's a good thing, though. I think that's a good thing. All of this just seems to make the author of this book completely miserable. All of it except the smaller moments, which is another highlight, by the way. Another highlight is when he reminisces about small family-style moments, his grandfather on the grill, his grandmother making salad dressing, his great-grandmother drinking a martini out there in the wilderness, of course, and him joining her when he was old enough and her being a bit surprised. I mean, those little moments like that are what he seems to want, and he would like all of the time to be like that rather than dealing with the press and stuff. In other words, a normal family. And it's a shame that he can't have it, but he does give us those little moments here and there where they're just people who seem to be fond of each other. Another highlight, we discover why Harry seems to like birds, hummingbirds especially. They are nomads, and he was also one at a time, so I think there's a kind of kinship there. Another highlight for me is that he nods to the statue of Queen Victoria at Balmoral and says, "Your Majesty." It's on the second floor of the place, and he's done this since childhood. He was told to do this, but he said he would have done so anyway because this is the queen who knew undying love, which is something that Harry was sorely missing. And in that way, he's kind of connecting himself to Queen Victoria in having a loving marriage as well. He also says that his father wanted to name him Albert. His mother vetoed that, but one of his middle names is Albert, though, so his father had the last laugh on that, though. He is displaying signs of the love that Albert and Victoria had, so it's fitting that he should mention her a couple times. Another highlight, I did not know that Harry was not informed that his brother was engaged until the palace announced it to everyone. And further bringing home that idea that these two brothers have separate lives for the most part. And the idea that they were ever really close seems to be a myth that was made up by the press and enjoyed by a public very eager to believe this about Diana's boys. I was eager to believe it. I had no way of knowing this wasn't true. Harry's brother also wanted to wear his beard to his own wedding in 2011 and was denied. So when Harry was allowed to wear his beard at Harry's wedding in 2018, Harry's brother threatened to shave him the night before the stag party, which is at once hilarious and disturbing, because that's very violent. But at the same time, they played like this with each other sometimes. But that's worrisome at the same time because of is it jealousy? Is it envy? This doesn't feel healthy. But again, these two were not best buddies the way that we want so desperately to believe they were, which explains a lot of the rift now. So, to whom would one recommend this book? I would recommend Spare to anyone who wants greater detail about Harry's well-known moments. You will find moments that perhaps were never said before or written before. It's also for anyone who's interested in intrigue, betrayal, brotherhood, humor, and just royal mess. Harry has said that he wants the royals to be a family and not an institution. This book, Spare, will not grant him that wish, I'm afraid. The royal family and the family business seem too intertwined to be separated, barring some complete abolition of the monarchy, which Harry is not interested in doing. Did Diana's book endear her to the in-laws? No. Did Charles's book bring him more of the hugs that he craved from his parents? No. And this book won't bring anybody together either, I don't believe. Usually what happens with these types of memoirs that are a bit more explosive as opposed to the more benign ones that are nostalgic, what usually happens is it doesn't bring the family closer, it just makes them more defensive. But they should still be written, though. If a royal feels the need to say something, go right ahead. What they are good for is usually to be historical records. It's a peek behind the curtain for the rest of us in the world to understand one of the world's most famous families and also one of the more enigmatic organizations out there. Any change from the royals will probably come from the outside when some international governing body declares a hereditary monarchy to be in violation of human rights of anyone born into it. Being born into a no-exit prison and being indoctrinated to uphold one's own subjugation through infighting, through the press, etc., should be a matter that the international community takes seriously as a problem. Only then will the royals have a chance at becoming a functional family that Harry wants them to be. Though I wouldn't hold my breath. Harry's not advocating for abolition. I wish Harry well. I would suggest please buy his book to be entertained, to have an historical record, but also to help him continue to fund his freedom so that he doesn't have to go back into that gilded cage. This has been another Sussex Podcast. Thank you for listening.